I haven't talked about my writing process much because honestly, it keeps changing. But I want to talk about it right before I change it up again. Slightly. Hey Dragonlings, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Skye. I'm a fantasy author who typically writes paranormal romance. I'm named St. Hegyes, and today I want to talk about my writing process from idea to publication. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. So I mentioned that my process is constantly changing. That's part of the reason I've never really filmed a video like this before, and I'm going to be changing it up again soonish. We are not going to discuss how I'm changing it up because I'm still figuring that part out. And I don't know exactly how much of my process is going to be changing as far as like this portion of step by step. But I will do another video on that soon. So today we're just going to talk about how I've been doing it recently. Because again, this is one of the things where I've talked about it, where I've said that it changes project to project. And it has. But for the past couple of projects, maybe because they're all in the same series, maybe not, I'm not certain, my process has remained roughly the same for a batch of projects. So that's the process we're going to talk about, is my most recent batch. So the reason it's changed is because of life, because of work, because of illness. Sometimes I have skipped steps, sometimes I have had to reorganize steps, but in the meanwhile, this is roughly what I've done from idea to publication. So starting off with idea, all my ideas are listed in Notion. I create a project page. As soon as I have an idea in my head, it gets its own project page in Notion on my master list of projects. I've had a video I recently did about that, which I will leave linked in the description below. I assign a project ID to each idea. I assign a project ID number to every idea, and then I assign a title, knowing that the title may change. Sometimes that title is an actual title that will stick with it all the way through. Sometimes that title is more like a number of keywords, 1 to 3 keywords that tell me roughly what the story is about, until I can come up with a title. And that's why I have the project ID number, so that I can always track the changes I'm making and the words I'm writing for every project, even if the title changes. And this mostly started because of the fact that I had word count trackers with titles, and I was like, I don't recognize that title, and it's because I had changed the title and had no notes of the title changing from what to what. So that's why I've started assigning ID numbers to everything, kind of like a social security number, so I can always find it, basically. Otherwise, there's a bunch of other information I might fill out based on what I know. And the one thing I always try to do, no matter what, is I try to come up with a 1-sentence description of the story, so that if I look at that keyword title and I'm like, I don't remember what story idea this is, I can read the 1-sentence description and be like, oh, yes, that's what this one was supposed to be about, roughly. Next, from there, I tend to brainstorm ideas. Again, we're sticking with Notion. A lot of my ideas come from dreams or maladaptive daydreaming. It varies. Sometimes I'll read a book and be like, I can do that better. Or sometimes I'll read a book and be like, I didn't like the way that ended. I'm gonna write my own story. I haven't done a lot of those. It's only happened a couple of times, and none of those are published. Sometimes when I'm brainstorming, I write out a blurb. I take that 1-sentence description and kind of expand it into a blurb. Sometimes I expand it into a synopsis. A lot of my brainstorming revolves around one or all of these steps, whether it is the blurb, the synopsis, or maybe even I have a particular scene in my head. This usually happens with dreams, honestly, where I write out that particular scene, and that's it for the brainstorming portion of it, where I'm trying to figure out what the story is going to be about. And it allows me to basically just play around, because anything is possible in this state, and nothing is set in stone because I haven't actually started writing the story itself. I'm just dumping all the ideas that could possibly happen in the story in a document in Notion. And especially with like the narrative structures, as far as like trying to figure out if this is something worth having as an actual project that I work on. I don't specifically follow any narrative structures. I know a lot of people praise Save the Cat, which I have never read. There's a lot of people, especially where fantasy is concerned, do the hero's journey. I don't really follow that. If any, I follow Freytag's pyramid, which is the mountain line with 5 points on that pyramid to tell a story, basically beginning, middle, and end kind of thing with a couple other things in between and worded differently. Sometimes I've used Romancing the Beat, which is based on a book by Hegyes, which I will have linked below. And I've used the 27 chapter outline by Katie Tastic. Again, I'll have a link below. The link I have below will be all about narrative structures, including ones I've mentioned but don't actually use. So if I use any, it's like a mixture of these. And again, varies from project to project. That's one of the, again, goes back to this is the reason I haven't really discussed this in the past, is because I change it up and it may be different. After I've done all that with the idea and I'm done playing around with it, I'm ready to actually write the story. I know I'm ready to write the story roughly when I know how it begins, the inciting incident that basically kicks off the entire story, and I know how it ends, the thing that will like wrap everything up. Not necessarily the climax, though sometimes it is the climax, but like the end game for the characters. In romance, it would be the fact that the characters get together kind of thing. I know I'm ready to write a story when I've hit that point. And so then we move on to drafting. For drafting, this is when I move out of Notion. I create a Scrivener document. I have a template that I use that I created for myself. I title it with the project ID number from Notion, and then the current title, knowing that that title could change even if that project ID does not. That's how I organize files, is based on the project ID numbers. And then sometimes what I do is I take all that brainstorming that I did in Notion and I drop it into Scrivener. Sometimes I skip the brainstorming portion in Notion because I already know that this is a story I want to write, so that brainstorming, as far as like the outline, the synopsis and stuff like that, sometimes that's dropped directly into Scrivener, because again, once I know what that inciting incident and that climax ending resolution idea are, once I know those two factors, I am ready to write the story. So after I've created my document in Scrivener, I write in chronological order. It doesn't matter if the idea, especially in the case of Where a Dream Is, usually I don't have the dream from the beginning to end. I just have like a scene and I've got to work stuff around it. Especially in the case like that, I do not start with that scene when I start actually drafting. I start from the beginning and I go to the end. Sometimes that means I have to start over often because either the story idea isn't working out right. I've recently had that happen with the third book in the Sultry Solstice series because I kept changing the main idea of the plot. I actually drafted that one. I started drafting that one 3 times, got halfway through the first 2 times and started over until I got to the 3rd rendition, which I ended up keeping. I will actually be keeping the one of those first 2 renditions as its own story idea. And that was part of the reason it wasn't working, is because the story was supposed to be about a gargoyle as the love interest. And I had changed it so there was a man cursed to be like trapped in stone. And it just wasn't working. That wasn't the trajectory I wanted the story to go. So that was part of the reason I started over 3 times. And then the 3rd time I returned to that original gargoyle idea and I was like, this is what it should have been all along. But I will end up writing the cursed man trapped in stone story eventually. And then another example I can think of is one that I'm still not finished with because I'm still fighting it for a different reason. And that is the story that was originally supposed to be a short story and is slowly becoming a novella, trying to become a novel, and that is a buck short. And the reason for that is because I keep discovering that I'm starting it in the wrong spot and I have to keep starting it earlier and earlier. Like, I need more background information that can't be dropped as like flashbacks. It needs to be, that's where the narrative needs to start kind of thing. So that's something I've been working on with that one. So as I'm drafting, I might need to start over several times before I actually get into the groove of the story. It varies from project to project. It doesn't happen often. Sometimes it does, but most of the time I can literally start at that beginning and go all the way to the end and be good. And that's just for the first draft. The first draft usually takes me 1 to 3 days for short stories if I've really got that story set in my mind. This is pretty typical for me, 1 to 3 days for a short story. And short stories for me, with what I've been doing lately, are anything below 20,000 words. For the past several years, my shortest short story was 8,000 words. And actually, I had to cut it down to 8,000 words because it started off as a 10,000 word story. That's roughly where I'm writing nowadays, is 10,000 to 20,000 as far as short stories go. And I had to cut it down because that one was particularly for an anthology submission where the word count max was 8,000 words. I have since expanded that story into a 13,000 word story, so it got its wish in the end. For novellas, it takes me roughly 2 weeks to a month, depending on the story. And novellas are anything from 20 to 50,000 words for me. And then for novels themselves, it can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months. Again, it varies because if I have to start over multiple times, it's not that I lose interest. It's just that I'm like, okay, I need to take a step back. I need to take a step back. I need to think about this. We need to regroup kind of thing. So that's why it takes me longer for some projects. And that's just the first draft. We're not talking final drafts. We're not talking anything like that. I am very much an underwriter most of the time where first drafts are concerned. I have a big lack where description is concerned. I actually have a video where I recently talked about that and how I'm going to be starting to improve that process. That's why I tend to have very much shorter first drafts, and then I like flesh it out further from there. I like to think of it as the fact that there are 3 stages for me personally where stories are concerned. The first draft is me just getting the bones of the story down. I just want the skeleton. And then the second draft is me like putting some muscles and ligaments on this skeleton. And then the third and hopefully final draft is usually me like giving him skin and fleshing him out, giving him some actual features. That was a weird way to describe stories, but it's the best way I can describe it. Moving on from drafting, from the first draft, let's talk about editing. Because there are multiple types of editing. There is the self-edit, there's the beta edits, and then there's the professional edits. I do not always do all 3. I do not always do a combination of all 3. It just varies, again, based on project to project. I try to only have 3 to 5 edits max, but again, it depends on the project. For short stories, I try to only have 3. For novellas, I try to only have 4. And for novels, I try to only have 5. And most of this is from the idea of different people getting their hands on it kind of thing. For the self-edit, I still do this in Scrivener. I have not left Scrivener yet at this point. I'll have 1 Scrivener document per project. And in that Scrivener document, I'll have multiple drafts. My template starts off with 3 drafts, and then I can add or subtract from there. I used to have different Scrivener documents, and then as I got to the point where I had so many project ideas and I had so many files, I condensed it down so that every project has its own Scrivener file that may have multiple drafts in it. So another quick editing PSA before I continue is the fact that I actually skipped a step. So what you'll see in the clips moving forward is more for like short stories and novellas. But what I wanted to add in here was the extra step I actually do when I'm working on a novel. Sometimes I do this step for novellas too. Novellas just tend to vary depending on how many plots I have going on in the story or like how complex the story is. But for novels, the step I skipped is the fact that before I even start to do an edit, I do a complete full read through of the story. This is more of a 2-step process. The first time I try to read through the story, I just try to read through the entire first draft and take it in and kind of like read it for the enjoyment kind of thing. There might be some things that as I'm reading, I'll make like a mental note, be like, oh, that needs to be developed more or something like that. But I'm not writing anything down. The second part of this 2-step process is that I will go back to the beginning of the story and I will read it again, but this time I will take handwritten notes of things I would like to improve on in the future as I am doing the editing. It could be as simple as a little reminder that I need to add in more description in various points. I try not to be like too specific with these notes. I want these to be more broad notes for like the overall story more than the like minute details in individual chapters. Like I don't want to get nitty-gritty specific, like make sure you add in a clue in chapter 2 to who the killer is in chapter 14 or something like that. Like I don't want to get nitty-gritty. It's more like make sure you include more description throughout the story of various locations. Make sure you develop the relationship between character A and character B more. It's more broad notes than anything else. Things that I need to keep in mind as I am editing so that when I go on to these next steps that I mentioned in these next clips, I have something to work with moving forward. Again, this is not something I generally do for the short stories. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I think part of the reason that this takes me so long is due to my timeline, which I'll get into more detail later, but it's also because of the fact that it takes me such a short amount of time to draft the first draft of a short story versus the first draft of a novel. And because of how long it takes me, there's things that I have forgotten that I've already included in the story by the time I finish the novel, plus I let it rest a little bit. Again, that resting period varies based on the story and what other things I've got going on in my life. But I just wanted to add this editing section here to let you know of that step when it comes to novels, which I haven't worked on a lot of novels lately. Most of what I've been working on are like short stories and novellas, and I think that's why I left this portion out of my process. But that way you know this is actually step one. When it's a novel, and sometimes when it's a novella, I read through the whole thing and take notes. So on with the video where I describe the rest of my process moving forward on short stories, novellas, and novels. As I am self-editing, I have recently started using the split screen feature where I will have draft one on one side and I'll have the new draft on the other side. And the new draft is a straight up blank document, and I rewrite everything, I would say almost word for word, but I am editing and changing it up as I go, fleshing it out, adding more description, stuff like that, so that the second draft will be lengthier than the first draft usually, or cleaned up a little bit better. This, again, may consist on 1 to 3 rounds depending on the story and what's going on in the story. So I may do this a couple times and have a couple different drafts before I'm ready to move on to the next step. So the next step for me personally is beta edits. I've only recently begun doing this again because I've only recently begun trying to get ready for publication again. My last publication was in 2024 and before that 2020, and the one I did in 2024 had already been edited and polished and ready to go basically before I published it in 2024. In fact, actually it was probably ready shortly after 2020. I think it was ready in like 2021, 2022. And I just held off on publishing it for various reasons we won't discuss in this video. But suffice it to say is that I haven't actually needed to use beta readers because I haven't had anything that I felt was ready to get ready for publication. So it's been a long time since I've used beta readers until recently. And by recently, I mean the past couple months. What I did is in order to get beta readers, I did a call out on my videos. I had described stories to friends that were like, ooh, give me, I want to read that. I need that in my life. In the future, I will do call outs on videos. I'll have posts listed on either my website or I'll have them listed on my YouTube community page. So if you're ever interested in beta reading something for me, keep an eye on those two things basically. And from there, people will fill out a form because I would rather have people who are familiar with my genre read my books than people who are not familiar with my genre. And from there, every individual person gets their own file in order to make their comments on and in order to read. And what it is that I have a template that I made in Google Docs. It is based on trad publishing and the requirements for trad publishing 10 to 15 years ago. I have not updated it. It has worked and it's been like beautiful, so I haven't felt the need to update it. If you're interested in learning more about that, I can do a video about that in the future. Just let me know in the comments. I copy and paste my finalized self-edited content from Scrivener into that pre-formatted document. Another editing PSA here. The reason I do the copy and paste method from Scrivener into Google Docs is because of the fact that I've got that pre-formatted manuscript, but also because every time I've used the compile feature in Scrivener to create a Microsoft Word or Google Docs document, it's somehow found a way to screw it up. Usually when it screws it up, it gets rid of my italics, and I use a lot of italics in my writing. I use it when I am doing anything with like thoughts of individual characters who we can see inside the head of. If there are magical abilities that deal with reading thoughts or with like being able to talk to each other in minds, I keep that with italics. So one of the things that I found when I was compiling documents from Scrivener into Microsoft Word or Google Docs is the fact that it would get rid of my formatting as far as like specific text. And that is why one of the many reasons why I don't like compile it straight from Scrivener into a document, and why I will just copy and paste my chapters and my text over into my pre-formatted document. So I just wanted to add that in there before anyone asks me why. That's why. And then I send it off to betas. And the return date for that is based on the length of the story. I try to give beta readers 1 to 2 weeks in order to read short stories because I know things happen. For novellas, I try to give at least a month. And if someone needs longer, I will obviously, depending on circumstances, give them longer. And then novellas, not novellas. For novels, I try to give 1 to 3 months. I hope that people can get it finished in 1 to 3 months. I feel like that's enough time to finish a novel. My novels are more on the shorter side. My longest novel, and I only have one this length, is 82,000 words long. I think as I get further in the process and I start doing more novels, they will start getting longer, only because I am developing my skills more. At the moment of this recording, my longest novel is like 80,000 words, 82,000 words, and there's only one that length. Most of them are 70 to 60,000 words long for my novels, so take that as you will. So usually I give readers 1 to 3 months in order to get me feedback back. From there, I compile notes. I really wish Google Docs would allow you to have multiple people comment on a document without them being able to see each other's comments, because honestly, if I could do that, I would just send out one document and just have everyone comment on that. But I would like them to have their own comments, their own thoughts, without being influenced by other people's thoughts. So hey, Google Docs, if you're listening, maybe make that a feature where you can have a toggle, kind of like when you're sharing it, you have a toggle where they can't see each other's comments and only the owner of the document can see all the comments. That would make things so much easier, because what I have to do currently is I take all of those documents from different readers and I compile it. I read through everything, all their notes, their comments and stuff like that. I delete anything that's not going to affect the story. I take screenshots of good comments where they're like, I really like how you did this, just for my own feel-good purposes. If I ever start to doubt my ability as a writer, I like to look at a file that I keep of all the screenshots of comments that people have made where I like, I really like how you did this. I love this characterization. I absolutely adore this character, kind of things. I keep a separate file for those kind of comments with screenshots of those kind of comments so that I can delete them from the document when I'm making my beta editing notes. If I'm confused about something they have mentioned, I will go ahead and ask them for clarification on it. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does. And I basically make a new document with all of the notes of things I need to change in the story moving forward. From there, I return to Scrivener. Yeah, we're back in Scrivener. I'll create a new draft file, and again, I will take my notes that I had made in order to make changes, and I will have all my notes from all my people on one side. I'll have my Scrivener document on the other, and I will begin again. I will start, this time I will make an exact copy of the last Scrivener file, and then I will just make changes to that file based on the notes I have. Instead of typing everything all over again, this time I'm actually just editing and changing things based on their feedback. So first draft, Scrivener, edits, Scrivener, beta readers, Google Docs, back to Scrivener for my changes based on beta feedback. And from there, I move on to professional edits. I actually again, I haven't had a professional edit in such a long time. I don't even know if my current editor, who I absolutely adore, she's been fantastic. I don't even know if she's still doing editing. I'll find out when I'm ready to get to that stage again. And this is one of the things that may change in my process moving forward for various reasons. I have worked with 4 different editors in the past that I can remember off the top of my head. Some have been good experiences, some have been bad experiences. I may need a new one in the future. I do not know at the moment. I will not even look into that until I'm ready for one. Not there yet. Not going to worry about it. From here, again, we're returning to Google Docs. I will copy and paste my newest draft that I did in Scrivener where I've made all the changes I wanted to. I will copy and paste that into another pre-formatted template to send to a professional editor. And once they have made their comments and their changes and they have sent it back to me, I will go from there. I only do professional edits with novellas sometimes. Not all novellas get a professional edit. Some do, some don't. But all of my novels will get a professional edit. I like to possibly include a developmental edit, because sometimes when you're working with multiple different plots and subplots, especially if you're working with a plot that arches over multiple books for a series, I want to make sure I've got all my puzzle pieces where they belong and that I'm answering everything as I need to. So I definitely like having a possible developmental edit. Again, it varies on the project, because some I might feel so solidly about. I'm like, I just need a line and copy edit. That's all I need. I just need to make sure that everything is good to go. I don't need that developmental edit. Whereas others, I'm like, I don't know if any of this makes sense. Can you please do a developmental edit? So it varies. It varies. And because of that, the process might take a bit too. And then going back to anthology submissions, because I've done those in the past, sometimes they have required that they've been professional edited. Sometimes they required that they just be submitted because they have their own editor on hand. Sometimes they're like, self-edit to the best of your abilities. We are not going to go behind you and check that you've had it professionally edited. And again, because it's a short story, I don't personally use a professional editor unless I have to, unless it's a requirement for short stories. It's not, for me personally, I know my stories well enough at that point with short stories, and it only follows a single plot, that I don't feel I need an editor. Betas, yes. Editor, no. But again, I've got years of experience that have led me to that point. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, I would have said, yes, I need an editor for even a short story. I am confident in my work now, 20 years later, that for me, a professional editor is not necessary for a short story. That is just for me. Everyone's different. The fun thing about both beta readers and editors is you do not have to accept everything as gospel. You can take what resonates with you and leave what doesn't. So if you do not agree with what an editor has said, you can choose not to make those changes. And it's Skye here again, because I realized that on this next clip, I didn't intentionally lie, but I lied about the process that I use with professional editors. So first off, before we get to there, again, with professional editor, there might be multiple passes, because depending on how many types of editing I do, if I do a developmental edit with the professional editor, there'll be that one edit, then there'll be the line edit, and then there'll be the copy edit, and so on and so forth. Depending on what kind of edits I do, there might be multiple passes of edits. The other thing is that once I'm in the document that goes to the professional editor, that is technically my final document, and any changes, I will make a copy of that document so that I still have the pristine notes from the editor, and then in that copy of the document, I will make changes. And as I'm making changes, I will delete any comments or notations from the editor until I have a complete, clean draft. From there, that's where the process gets a little tricky again, because after I have cleaned up that document as much as I'm going to, I will read back through it one final time. This will be the final time I read through it. I will clean up any typos that I see. I will make sure there's nothing else I want to add in, because there's always something. You are going to be forever changing things. I feel like after I finish a edit from a professional editor and the professional editor's like, you won't need me anymore, that's when I know personally that a story is ready for publication. When the editor has pointed out and said, yeah, we're done, this is good. Or as I'm doing that final read through, depending on how many stages, what kind of editing we've done, as I read through it myself, I'm like, this is a solid story. This is something I am happy with publishing. And then I just clean up the typos and any grammatical mistakes I see. And that is the final draft. Okay. And from there, I take that final draft and I copy and paste it back into Scrivener as a final, like, the file name might be final draft, or it might be draft whatever number it is, but that to me is the final draft of whatever story we're working on. To clarify further, because I realized that might have come out a little confusing as I was editing my edit. Welcome to Inception. The reason I copy and paste back everything into Scrivener is because, let's say I decide to make changes to it in the future, because of the fact that I do all my edits in Scrivener, it's already in Scrivener, so I can make changes to it later. So that's why I copy and paste everything back over into Scrivener, that final document into Scrivener. I do keep that final document. That's what we're going to use working with the next steps moving forward into publication. But I do copy and paste that all back into Scrivener, so it's in Scrivener, so I have access to that if I need to make further changes. And then another thing that I usually do when I have finalized everything is I take that Google Docs document and I download a copy of it in a doc or docx format, and I email that to myself. And the reason I do that is because I have lost so many files over the years due to either corrupt files or accidentally deleting them, or purposely deleting them thinking I had another copy, or having multiple copies that I was trying to condense into one place and I deleted all of them. The reasons vary. So the one thing I will do is I will take that finalized document and I will download it to my computer and I will email it to myself, and attaching it to that email. And there are multiple reasons I do that other than just making sure I keep a file on hand. The other reason is that if it turns out that my works are ever picked up by a publisher, I want to make sure that I have the finalized, cleanest version of that story to submit to said publisher for them to tackle with their own skills, rather than accidentally sending them an older version or having to read, copy, and paste from my Scrivener document into a new template. I can just take that one that I had emailed to myself and use that to submit to a publisher in the future if I ever got that opportunity or if I ever go that route. So that is why I do that. And that's usually the very final step that I do under the editing before we move into the final step of publication. So let's go ahead and talk about that. From there, we can move on towards publication. At this time, if I have done a short story, we are probably on draft 3 or 4. With novellas, we are on anywhere from 3 to 5. And the same thing with novels, we're on number 3 to 5. It just varies on the project. The first thing I like to do is I like to assign an ISBN number. This is only for paperback versions. I do not do an ISBN number for ebooks anymore. Maybe someday in the future that might be a smart thing to do, but at this moment in time, I do not. I have to buy my ISBN numbers through Booker. I'm not certain how to pronounce it. Again, I will leave a link in the description if you're interested in checking that out. I know some countries give free ISBN numbers. The US does not. I tend to buy packs of ISBN numbers. I would love to buy a 100 pack. And if I ever do buy a 100 pack, I will be assigning both ebook and paperback numbers. At the moment, I only do paperbacks because I buy them in bulks of 10. And for those unaware, you have to have a separate ISBN number for different formats. And the reason I can get away with not doing ebooks at the moment is because I only upload to KDP at this time. And KDP will assign an ASIN number instead of an ASIN number instead of an ISBN number. I don't know what the difference is. Do not ask me. Couldn't tell you. And there might be other sites that do the same thing. I do not know. Again, we're just going with what I know, and I only know KDP at the moment. So from there, I assign an ISBN number, and the reason I do that first is because the next step for me is formatting. Now, I format with 2 different programs at the moment, and one I've used forever and a day. The other one is more recent to me. The first one I use is Vellum, and sometimes I do both ebook and paperback through Vellum. Sometimes I just do ebook, especially with the short stories. I don't publish paperbacks for the short stories. I'll do a collection of short stories, but I will not publish them individually as paperbacks. Just Vellum for those. And again, if I'm doing a paperback, I can use Vellum for both paperback and ebook. But a program I have recently been introduced to that I actually prefer for paperback design, it does not do ebooks at all, is Scribus. So I will also use a combination of Vellum and Scribus. Vellum for the ebook, Scribus for the paperback. And so that's something I will be doing moving forward. And the reason I assign that ISBN number for paperbacks first is because I like to include the ISBN number in the barcode that I create that will be on the paperback. And it's also in the copyright information of the paperback as well, which means I need to have that digit. So I will do ISBN number, then I will format it for both ebook and paperback or just ebook. And then from there, I either create or order a cover. For short stories, I've been creating them myself in Canva. For novellas, it varies. Some I have created myself in Canva, some I have ordered through particular cover designers that I know and trust. And then for novels, I always order that from someone else. I have many pre-made book covers that I bought with intentions of writing stories for them. So if you just see suddenly an influx of stories dropping, it's because I already had the cover. And some of those, one of the things I do like about some of the cover designers I have used in the past is the fact that they have sales every once in a while. So a lot of covers that I have that were not custom made, some of the covers that I have that were like pre-made covers, a lot of those were ones I bought at discounts because I just was like, I like this. If it's still available when there's a sale, I will buy it hands down. And that's exactly what's happened with a lot of the covers I have. I have bought so many covers that were pre-made covers on sale. Yeah, we're not going to get into that. I had an addiction for a while there. I've been doing really good lately. I haven't bought a cover in a while, except for a custom-made cover for a new book. So yeah, So cover is the next thing that happens. And again, cover happens after all these other previous steps because you need to know the page count of your paperback because it's based on the size of the paperback you're doing. It's based on the type of paper you're using. And they need those mentions, that information in order to create your front, back, and spine for your paperback. So that's why the cover for me comes after formatting. And formatting for me happens after I've done everything else, basically. Formatting should be your final step. That thing should be damn near as perfect as you can make it, and you are not going to make any changes to it whatsoever when you get to that formatting stage, because of the reason that is going to affect how your cover design is. From there, I schedule my pre-order. If I'm going to do pre-order, I go back and forth on whether or not I want to do pre-orders with short stories. Part of me says yes, part of me says no, only because of the fact that with short stories, not going to do a very long pre-order. If I do a pre-order, if I do schedule a pre-order, it'll only be like a 2-week period. Caveat here, I only go back and forth on whether or not I want to do pre-orders with short stories standalones. With series, I absolutely will. My idea with series is that I want to make sure all the stories in a series, a short story series, are complete before I even schedule the pre-order for the first one, to make sure that I don't fall off the wagon. So I will schedule a pre-order for short story series. It's the short story standalones that I question. And then with the short story series, when I schedule those, I will schedule all of them at once, starting with a 2-week period for that first one. And every book after that will come out 2 weeks from the one prior to that. So 2 weeks for the first one, a 2-week pre-order for the first one, and then starting from the date the first one releases, the pre-order will be 2 weeks for the second one and onwards until I get to the very last one. So just to clarify that, for standalones, that's the ones I question whether or not I want to do pre-orders. But for series, I absolutely will do pre-orders. So, all right, carry on. Whereas novels, I can schedule out. I think with KDP, you can schedule out as far as a year. For novellas, I like to do 2 or 3 months. So 2 weeks for a short story, 2 to 3 months for a novella, 6 months to a year for a novel. If I do a pre-order at all. Sometimes I'm like, it's done, let's drop it. If it's part of a series, I like to do pre-orders. And the reason for this is because I have a track record of starting series and not finishing them. I have 4 books published. All 4 books are part of 3 different series. I have a track record of not finishing series. So something I'm starting moving forward, something I've mentioned, and part of the reason I haven't published in so long, is because I want to have all of the stories. Since I'm indie publishing, I can get away with this, especially since it's not my main source of income. I want to have all the stories, at least the first draft of all the stories, done before I set a pre-order for the first one. So in this case, lately what I've been doing is I've been working on Sultry Solstices, which is a 7 short story series. And so I want all 7 first drafts done before I even schedule the pre-order of the first book. And I've been working on this for a while now. And I'm still not done because I keep struggling with various books and various processes. But my point is that when I do get all 7 ready for publication and I'm ready to start publishing them, I will have a pre-order up for all 7 at one time, starting with the first one at 2 weeks out and then publishing every other story in the series 2 weeks afterwards. And I will have all 7 scheduled for pre-order at the same time, so I can just drop them and be done with it. I am very much the kind of person that I want to set it and forget it. And that's part of the reason I want to do pre-orders, is because I want to be able to just set the pre-order and not worry about it ever again. It's done. It's out of my hands. I can't do anything about it unless I fuck up. That's a different story for another video. After that, timeline-wise, how long does this whole process take? And the truth is, it's all over the place. I don't know. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years for the different stages. Some stories can't be rushed. Sometimes I struggle to them. I spent 6 weeks trying. I mentioned the 3rd story in the Sultry Solstice series. It's a short story. It came out to 13,000 words long. I struggled with it for 5 weeks because I didn't really know where the story was going when I was trying to write it. I had those false starts. So I got halfway done, had to start over, got halfway done, had to start over, got all the way through. And so it took longer to write. However, the other day, a couple weeks ago, I had an idea for a werewolf story. I call it Werewolf Smut for short. It now has an official title, but not the point. I had an idea for that, and I wrote it across 2 days. I'm going to do an edit on it. I'm going to send it to beta readers who have requested it, and it will probably be published before the end of the year. The difference is that one's a standalone, whereas the other one is part of a series. So it varies. The timeline is going to vary depending on the project, depending on what is going on in my personal life, depending on what my plans are for the publication. And then other factors that a lot of people don't think about as far as timeline goes, especially in my case, is my mental health. I am very much the kind of person that writing is a escape for me from real life. And there are times, though, when I don't really write for anyone's eyes but me. Like, it's just meant to be for me. I'm not ever having intentions of publishing said story. Then there's also outside factors. I am married. I have a husband. We have 2 kids. Both are very active in community endeavors and sports. So I am very busy. And sometimes that does affect my writing, especially because of the fact that writing is not a full-time job for me. It is currently, because I'm currently unemployed at this moment of recording, hopefully for not too much longer, but overall, throughout my life, as I've been writing since my teenage years, I have been employed while writing. And because of that, because this is not a full-time job for me, because this is more of a hobby, I am very flexible with my timeline. I also have a problem where I start a lot of stories, and if I lose interest or I get another shiny idea and I start that one, I don't finish the previous story. So a quick editing note before I continue editing this video. Part of the reason my timeline for stories is all over the place is because whenever I get stuck on a story, rather than trying to force myself to work through it, I switch projects. It's actually one of the reasons why I have so many projects that I'm working on at the same time. However, I also do fall down a rabbit hole a lot of times where I will get a shiny new idea and I will start working on that project and never return to the previous project. I have begun to curb that by creating the Notion pages. That's actually, it's one of the many reasons why I decided to start creating like a master list of projects. Because what I'll do is when I get a shiny new idea, I will add it to my master list of projects. I will write just enough details, brainstorming wise, to get the idea out of my head so that it doesn't bug me anymore. And then I'll return back to whatever project I was working on. And since I started implementing that process, I've had less and less problems with not finishing projects. It might take me a long time to finish projects because of the fact that when I get stuck, I'm still not forcing myself to work through a problem. But at the same time, I am actually completing more projects since I started implementing that process. So I just wanted to clarify that real quick with this edit, rather than like letting you believe that there was no reason why my timeline is all over the place. My timeline is all over the place because of the fact that I stop and start projects often, and sometimes I return back to them, sometimes I don't, and sometimes I lose interest in them, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I can carry all the way through the project without stopping, sometimes I have to take a break. It just varies, but I wanted to clarify that before I continue. So carry on. In a lot of cases, actually, I have a bunch of finished stories that just need editing, and I haven't moved on to the editing portion of them. And that's why I'm going to be changing my process moving forward. Again, going to be a whole other video where I talk about that. I'm trying to streamline my process, so hopefully in the future, if I'm asked what my timeline is for stories from idea to publication, I'll be able to answer. But at this moment, I don't know. I don't know. If it's a piece of work that's going to be in an anthology, I follow their timelines. So in that case, I do know what the timeline is going to be because they have specific dates on when you need to finish stuff by, when you need to turn stuff in. But everything else that's on my own schedule, that's one of the reasons why word of the year is discipline, because I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to be more disciplined about my own process. I am trying to streamline my own process. I'm trying to get things in a working order so that I can start getting stuff out actively. So hopefully this will change in the future. But at the moment, there's no rhyme or reason to anything I do, basically. I just work on stuff as I feel like it. So there you have it. That is my general writing process. That is what it looks like. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a butterfly emoji for the metamorphosis my writing process has taken over the years, where I've changed it constantly and how it will be changing again in the future as I try to streamline it. My question for you today is, what's your current writing process? What's something I mentioned that you might want to implement into your own writing process? Because that was something else I didn't mention, is that I love learning other people's writing processes because they might be doing something that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do that too. Which is actually part of where my beta reading process has come from because of how other people have done it. So yeah. Anyways, that is all I have for you guys today. I will see you all in my next video. Bye, Dragonlings.